what's the Async-First approach all about and why it is so good for remote teams?
Yeah, so if I had to explain it in one line, and it's a provocative line, so you're welcome to get upset when you hear that line, but the line is meetings are the last resort. They are not the first option. All right.
You mentioned about Gen Z in your book as well. So can you talk about Gen Z and their work preferences on how Async-First aligns with the values and expectations of the future workforce?
Yeah, I mean, as I say this, I should mention that Gen Z in India is very different from Gen Z in the West. Also, even when we talk about Global South, Gen Z in India versus Gen Z in Latin America versus Gen Z in Africa, very different, personas out there. But a couple of things, right? One thing is that if you look at a lot of social movements that are happening, whether it is related to climate. In fact, Al Jazeera very recently did this whole feature about Gen Zs and their pursuit of work-life balance.
Are you a Scrum Master or an Agile coach who is fed up of listening to teams complaining about feeling overwhelmed by endless meetings or struggling to help teams stay productive in your remote setup? You are not alone. Forget being glued to your webcam all day. Our guest talks about why traditional agile methods fall short for remote teams and how async first can be your game changer. We'll tackle your biggest concerns from building a thriving remote culture and addressing communication challenges to boosting productivity and avoiding transition pitfalls. In this episode, we dive deep into the async first approach with our guest Sumeet Moghe. Sumeet is an author of the Async First Playbook, a principal consultant at ThoughtWorks with 20 plus years of IT consulting experience across multiple industries and clients. He specializes in product innovation and evolution, running large-scale technology and organizational transformation initiatives and advising executives on how to prepare for the workplace of the future. So without further ado, let's welcome Sumeet.
Hello, Sumit. Welcome to the podcast by Agile Coaching Roundtable. It's a great pleasure having you on our show. So, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been listening to some of your recent episodes, and it's been good fun. You folks do a great job with this podcast.
Thank you so much, Sumit. And today we would want to have a conversation about your book, definitely the Async First Playbook. So, I have heard good things about this book, and a big shout out to Petula for talking about your book. So we happen to do a roundtable discussion with the agile coaches, and in the conversation, so we were just talking about how to deal with the collaboration issues with the teams, being remote working and future of agile and so on. So that's when Petula mentioned about your book, and she went ahead and even uh, wrote the name of the book. That's when we figured out, okay, this is someone, this is the book from someone who is in India. So we thought that would be the greatest opportunity to have a conversation with you. So here we are. So thank you so much for accepting this invite and coming over. And as I mentioned, today we would want to have a discussion around your book. So we would start with the basic question. So what's the Async First approach all about and why it is so good for remote teams?
Yeah, so if I had to explain it in one line, and it's a provocative line, so you're welcome to get upset when you hear that line, but the line is meetings are the last resort. They are not the first option. All right. And I think all of us have experienced this in the last 3 or 4 years, that when we start working in a distributed fashion, particularly, with the COVID-19 induced remote work revolution, Now, if you look at even teams that are quote unquote hybrid, you are remote in relation to some other colleague of yours. And what happens as a result is your day, if you've not thought about your work processes enough, is littered with Zoom meetings or Microsoft Team meetings. And that is problematic, right? So the first statement is meetings are the last resort. They're not the first option. What does that translate into? It translates into two other principles. So if meetings are not the first resort and they're the last option, then how do you communicate in a team? Well, you have to elevate writing as a primary citizen when it comes to communication in a team. Which then means that, look, we are talking right now and it's fast paced. It happens instantly. Writing is not instant, which means that teams then need to embrace some lag. What that reasonable lag is something that teams need to, agree amongst themselves, which is to say that if I send you an email, Ramya, how long before I expect a response? If I send you a chat message, how long before I expect a response? If a production system is on fire and I need Ramya's help or Vivek's help, how do I get in touch with them? Because then, of course, 24 hours is not a good enough, response time, right? I need immediate response time. So what's the channel on which I go and get help? And so that's what it is. Meetings are the last resort. They're not the first option. Writing is a first-class citizen for communication, and everyone needs to embrace reasonable lag when it comes to communication. And then with these principles, you start re-architecting what your remote workplace, what your distributed digital workplace starts to look like. Does that make sense?
Yes, but also then I have a maybe for a clarity point of view. When we are working within team, and when you said that there might be a burning issue that needs to be fixed, how much that reasonable lag would be tolerated in terms of the tolerance that we can say, and how do you think that saying that maybe having your first option as a writing option rather than getting into a quick call, a Zoom call, how do you think that would fix into this context?
Yeah. If you didn't have a but, I would be almost offended, right? Because I was trying to make a provocative statement, and a provocative statement needs to have a but. So obviously, now you said, if something is on fire, right? Of course, you don't go and write things up. At that point of time, you probably need all hands on deck. And at that time, the reasonable response time is immediate. And in which case, you need a channel on which you can get in touch with people immediately. Whether that is a phone call, whether that is something else, who knows, right? But you need an immediate channel for that. But as you know, and I know, after many years of working in this industry, everything isn't urgent. We just make everything into urgent. There is something called the Eisenhower matrix. I'm actually quite happy that you have a but to my provocative principle, because if there wasn't a but, then there's no point making a provocative statement. But the thing is, you already said, right? If it's urgent, if there's a production issue, which means what's your response time? Your response time is immediate. And so you need a channel on which you're going to get an immediate response. Writing will not get you an immediate response in those situations. So don't go async. The book is the Async-First playbook. It is not the async-only playbook. It means that whenever possible, you start asynchronously. And it includes pretty much 90% of the scenarios of us working in distributed teams, which are not urgent. When we are working on a feature, for example, that's not urgent. When we are analyzing customer requirements, that is not urgent. When we are doing pair programming, it is not urgent. Even when we have to make a decision, if you look at all of the improvements in continuous delivery, more than 90% of the decisions that you make on a software team are reversible, right? So let us say you and I are pairing Vivek, and we make a decision. We don't have to call the entire team into a meeting and say, this is what our decision is. What do you think? We can make that decision, put that into a decision record, let the team look at it. If at a later point they feel we want to backtrack, it's fairly easy to backtrack. Now, of course, there will be irreversible decisions, like decisions that you take which affect the company's business, right? Sure, make them the irreversible decisions. You have to have some sort of a decision workflow for those. But most of the other things, you can apply a bias for action, right? Where the two people working pairing take a decision and move on. You see what I mean?
Yes. I absolutely get that. Uh, so do you mean to say that the way that we operate in agile is maybe it's my understanding again, is it the agile approaches are too synchronous for remote teams, and is that the case? I mean, if yes, why do you think so that is the case?
Yeah, it's not my place to question what the Agile Manifesto said about 21 years back. But there are a few things we should be aware of when we sit here in 2024, right? A couple of things. One is that this was a group of 17 white men in a ski resort in Colorado. There's not a lot of diversity out there, right, in that group. And it's not as if they deliberately kept the women out, they deliberately kept LGBTQI out. It's just the shape of the industry at that time, right? If you, again, try to peel away another layer, distributed agile wasn't a very common thing at the time. In fact, 2001 is when the manifesto got written. 2005 is when Matt Simons wrote in the Carter Consortium about how we were practicing distributed agile. And then Martin Fowler went ahead and followed it up with an essay where he said, distributed agile is very different from the standard variety of agile where Kent Beck said everyone needs to sit together. Right? So there were already a lot of questions from 2001 going on to 2005. But the bigger thing is the industry has changed quite a bit since 2001 to today, right? And there are a bunch of things that you will appreciate because you folks are in India. And I know I saw Ramya's worked for Capgemini, so she's worked in the services industry. So most people who work in India, we build software for people in the West. Now, try and imagine this, Vivek and Ramya. I'm sure you've experienced this sometime in your career. Imagine a client sitting in San Francisco, a team sitting in Bangalore. In winters, there is no time overlap.
Correct.
It basically means that either the client or the team is going to have to work at the cost of their personal lives to maintain some time overlap, right? And you can do that for a couple of days in a week when you actually need to do some collaborative synchronous work. But when that happens to be every single day of the week, where every single day ends at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. and thereabouts, it takes a toll on your personal life. And the other thing, this is not an Indian problem. This is a worldwide problem, but more so actually in India, if you think of it. Women share a disproportionate burden of household responsibilities, which means that when you have a setup like this, by definition, you're going to have less women in that setup. And I've gone ahead and researched this. The percentage of women in teams like this is 33% lower, a third lower than the percentage of women on teams which have more reasonable work hours. So just from the perspective of diversity and inclusion, which is a far cry from the 17 white men in a ski resort in Colorado, is a very different scenario from today, right? And then again,
Absolutely.
think about this. Think about culture, right? All three of us are Indians. All three of us speak English very differently. We speak it fluently, but we speak it very differently. Now, the thing is, you folks are podcast hosts, so you have a significant degree of fluency with English, and that might have been down to your and my education, right? But you know that everyone doesn't get that level of education when it comes to English. They might be smart and talented in another way. Now, what happens? I've spent about 17 years in my company. I've spent about 20 odd years in the industry. I get into a meeting with a junior person. Who do you think is going to hold sway in that conversation? Because of my command over English, my experience, and my tenure, I will most likely win every single conversation which is synchronous. But when I have an asynchronous discussion with that junior colleague, and that junior colleague has the time to write things down, and I am forced to slow down and examine everything that that junior colleague has written, I'm giving space to include their ideas. And oftentimes, a lot of the new ideas and the great ideas come from people who may not be as fluent as at speaking, right? So there's that. There's a lot of other benefits as well. We talked about the fact that, let's say you cannot get into a meeting, then in that case, you have to take a decision, right? And we know that software decisions are reversible. Many software decisions are reversible. So you take a bias for action. If your day is not littered with meetings, you have more time for deep work. Paul Graham wrote way back in the early 2000s that developers, product managers, designers, they need blocks of 4 hours every day to be able to get anything constructive done. With our Zoom fatigue, you'd be lucky to get like 1.5, 2 hours between meetings where you somehow sneak in some work. How are you getting any deep work done in that? Instead, if you're able to carve out blocks which are meeting free, then you're able to get deep work done as a team, right? And more importantly, work-life balance matters, right? One of the things which we've learned from the pandemic, why is it that people are still so keen about remote work, even though offices are open? Why is it that companies that offer remote work actually get more candidates? Because people see that that's an opportunity for work-life balance. Now, work-life balance, we've only scratched the surface with remote work, which is location independence, work from wherever you want. But what you need is another level of work-life balance, which is time independence. Work any time that you want. Of course, with some restrictions and some compromises in certain situations. But if you have that flexibility, imagine how inclusive you can make the workplace and how society, I mean, there's a moral responsibility the industry as well has to be a microcosm of the society that it exists in, right? So to a certain extent, it solves that problem.
Wow, so many amazing points that you made. So let me, I don't know where to start, begin talking about this. It connected with me at so many levels. So maybe when you talked about working in the service industries and getting that time overlapping is very difficult, and to achieve that, we may have to go overboard in terms of working hours. We have been doing that all our lives. Let's be honest, we have been doing that because for us Indians to have a maximum overlap with the uh, foreign clients, so to speak, we have to adjust our working hours, and it takes a toll on our lives. Uh, Forget about work-life balance. And honestly, if you ask any Indian, I can relate to Indians is why I'm saying this. It could be true elsewhere also. If you ask people, the reason for leaving the job is work pressure because of long working hours, and another reason would be the boss. That is another aspect altogether. But then the majority of the people would say the reason being is the working hours. And yes, I agree on the diversity part. Definitely, diversity. I mean, when I say diversity, in the terms of voicing out the opinions or suggestions, all those things, diversity in that is definitely missing. And when you talked about independence in terms of the place, or whether it is remote working or working from anywhere, I am lucky to say that the organization I work currently in, I work in Fractal now. I'm not in novice saying or it is promoted, but then I'm lucky to say that I have got that flexibility to work in the hours that I choose. And I wasn't lucky in any other organization where I used to face. I mean, I have there have been cases where I work like 17 hours in a day, and it had a a big impact on my health. And now, since I have that flexibility, I can completely vouch for it. I mean, the amount of independence that I feel. First, it is remote working. Second, independence to work in the flexible hours. And you also talked about the culture. And talking about culture, right? I mean, building a strong team culture is crucial for any team, right? So, and it can be very challenging in remote settings. So, do you think inclusive culture in async-first team helps? And if yes, then how do we do that?
Yeah, let me answer that in two parts. I mean, I think one of this also goes back to Vivek's original question, which is the connection to Agile. Look, if you look back at the Agile Manifesto, there's a principle that says the best method to convey information in a team is face-to-face conversation. Right? Now, tell me something. What is more important, getting the best team together? Because, well, you know how scarce good tech talent is, right? So now if, let's say, you are getting a startup in place, I'm in Pune, the two of you are in Mumbai, and we find this really talented person in Mysore. Our ability to work with that person is far more important than our ability to work face to face with that person, right?
Absolutely.
So there itself, there's an element of inclusion that comes in, and so these are things that we need to consider with time. And when we say culture, part of culture is how you include different people in the team. Now, when it comes to team culture, because I think that's important. There are a couple of things that we have to consider. One is cohesion, the other is trust, and the third factor is productivity, right? Because see, one of the things is we feel that teams that are hugging and kissing each other are the teams that are doing well. But actually, it's the other way around. Teams that are doing well are the teams that are hugging, high-fiving each other, right?
Wow, I love
Yeah.
this.
Because look at it, look around at any sports team. It's when they win that you see their body language, they're high-fiving, their chest pumping, all of that, right? So doing well is very important. So couple of things. When we were in the office, our companies used to take a lot of care in designing that particular workplace. Or where am I going to place the meeting room? How am I going to design the workplace? How are the cubicles going to look like? Where will people meet socially, etc. Right? When we work remotely, I've noticed that we don't pay enough attention to the design of the digital workplace. And there are many things to consider. So this is not my framework. This is a framework that GitLab promotes. They call it Teamops. And they say there are 4 pillars to how a high-performing team operates. Pillar 1 is what they call shared objective reality. Anything that anyone knows, everyone knows. So for example, does your team have a team handbook where all of the information is there? Nobody has to ask stupid questions. Everyone has this aspersion, right? Now, I don't want to ask a stupid question. Can I go search somewhere? So is there something like a team handbook where most of the team information is out there? Okay, so team handbook is just one part of it, but I'm just giving you an example. The second is there a framework for anyone to contribute? I see a piece of work that is languishing on the team's task board. What do I do to pick it up and just get it to completion? How much autonomy is there for me to be able to contribute? Right? And when I contribute and get something done, how does my team recognize it? Right? So is there some clear design for it? The third is decision velocity. Decisions are the fuel for high-performing teams. The teams that make more decisions make more progress, flat out. Even if they make more bad decisions, by the very nature of making more decisions, they will make more progress. Right?
Wow.
So now, how do you unblock decisions? The thing that we talked about, software development, most things are reversible. So how can you distinguish between reversible and irreversible decisions and make the reversible decisions as decentralized as possible? And the fourth is clear measurement, which is how do we know that the team is moving forward? Is it just story points? Do I have some sort of a connection with my client to know how, or my client or my stakeholder or my customer or my business to be able to know what impact we are creating? How do I know I as an individual am succeeding, right? What feedback do I get from my peers to know that I'm going in the right direction? So all these 4 pillars, shared objective reality, everyone contributes, decision velocity, and clear measurement, give us pointers around how do we design the digital workplace. And that's absolutely crucial. And if you do that, then of course you can start building a really healthy team culture when you're remote.
Okay. Well, I'm still obviously in the conversation that you did mention one thing I'm just trying to still clear out is to going back to the principle, right, where the manifesto says having a face-to-face communication. Maybe I read it somewhere. I don't remember it now. Obviously, it did talk about, or it said. Again, I think it's Conway's law. I believe, maybe I'm not sure about it, but it did say that if there are teams building a part of an application separately, that system will probably have two components. I mean, introducing dependencies and additional communication overhead. So I think this statement is where I believe the manifesto, in a certain way, try to address the problem, saying that it's good to have face-to-face communication. I mean, I'm still into that conversation. And do you want to share your thoughts on particular to this point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at no point in my book do I say we should not meet face to face. As I clarified right at the start, async first is not async only. It just means that when you start on any kind of collaboration, consider the asynchronous alternatives first. And then if that doesn't serve your purpose, by all means, go to a synchronous alternative. And if that synchronous alternative also is a co-located alternative, absolutely go for it. And by the way, this is something even companies that are all remote, they've been all remote for the last 10 years, they advocate for, right? So for example, one of the things that DHH, he's the creator of Ruby on Rails, he runs 37 signals. What does he say? He says that, look, when we meet face to face, let's say you and I, we meet for lunch, there is a disarming quality about the fact that, we are breaking bread together, we are smiling at each other, we are cracking a joke. And what that also does is it lowers our intellectual barriers a little bit. So now let us say we have this nice lunch 1 month. Then for the next 2 months, just that memory of having had that shared experience together allows us to trust each other for a much longer time, right? And then, of course, it's like a battery. You charge it during that face-to-face interaction. Now your trust battery is fully charged, your intellectual barriers are fully lowered, and then the battery gets discharged over a period of time. And then you need to charge it again. So absolutely, face-to-face interactions have their place. It's just that we shouldn't be reaching for them all the time. And in fact, there's research around this. You should follow this guy called Prithviraj. He's a Harvard Lumri professor, and he's been doing some really great research around how much face-to-face is absolutely crucial and at what frequency you should be doing it. And what they're arriving at is once or twice a quarter is good. It's good enough. And then you start doing other things, such as one-on-one meetings, such as online team activities, such as team topologies and team APIs, right? Where you agree how one team will interact with another team, right? And then you start layering all of these practices together, and you get around this problem of, trust is low, intellectual barriers are high, we're not collaborating with each other, et cetera, et cetera.
I have maybe a different perspective to this, to what Vivek said. So when we are talking about when we are talking about face-to-face communication, right? So as we are changing, as the technologies are changing, as the world is changing, this is a remote working world, or a digital world, or maybe a social age that we may want to call. Isn't this remote or maybe face-to-face communication? This is also face-to-face communication. Online communication, video calls are also the face-to-face communication in today's day and age, right? So I don't think so that when we say that manifesto talks about face-to-face communication, that does not mean that we have to be physically have a face-to-face communication, but this is also a form of a face-to-face communication for today's day and age.
For
Am
sure,
I
for
right
sure.
or wrong?
Absolutely.
No, you're absolutely right. The challenge, however, which I identify with this, is that, look, today you can argue that all three of us are face to face, but we are face to face for an agenda.
Correct.
And what is happening is that the agenda mediates our interaction. And one of the things that a lot of people do express, now there needs to be some research around this, is that when you meet in an agenda-free setup, that allows you to connect at a different level. Now, let me be very clear. I don't believe in this idea of best friend for life at work.
Yeah.
For me to be effective at work, I don't need a best friend for life there. But I need to be able to trust that person, right? I need to be able to know that person. So I need to have a trusting relationship with my teammate. And for that, just an agenda-driven conversation doesn't always work. Now, of course, in my company over the last several months, there's been a little bit of a freeze on expenses, which means that the company isn't sponsoring people meeting up, right? But what I'm doing on my side is at least I do regular one-on-ones, and those one-on-ones are agenda free. Right? So we have a specific time when we meet and we talk about almost everything under the sun, sometimes about work. Then, if somebody's in the neighborhood, we catch up for breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever, off our own dime, not ideal. Ideally, the company should sponsor that because it's in the company's benefit. But yeah, I mean, in the meantime, at least you do that because you want a trusting relationship with your colleague. And so those are workarounds.
Absolutely. I'm completely aligned to what Ramya did say, and obviously your thoughts over here, Sumit. And I think going back to the Teamops thing that you mentioned, and in that one of the pillar that you did mention is like framework for for anyone to make that decision or to contribute, right? I'm just thinking it in terms of the framework. I mean, just for example, maybe where in Scrum we propose, team becoming self-managing, and obviously it means like anyone can make that decisions, right? So anyone can, if the team believes, if the entire Scrum team believes that something needs to be done at that point of time, they have the autonomy to make that, right? So it still fall under that framework that you propose?
Yeah, absolutely. But there are two things which we need to distinguish here, Vivek. There is work execution and workflow. So work execution is I'm writing I'm writing code to satisfy a certain user story. Okay, that is work execution. I do not want my tech lead standing on my shoulder and telling me, please write this class this way. Okay, because that is downright irritating. It's disrespectful as well, and it does not give me the ability to solve the problem using my skills. Workflow, on the other hand, is not something that should always be democratic. It should be democratic from time to time. What does workflow mean? It means the standard processes that you follow as a team. And the reason why workflow should not always be democratic, and I'll tell you the situations when it should be democratic, is if you always leave it democratic, then for every task, the team starts second guessing themselves as to what the next step is. And when you don't have the calmness of a process saying, all right, we know this will go into this particular step and then it'll go into this particular step, then what do? To alleviate your calmness, you will get Vivek on a call, you'll get Ramya on a call, you'll get somebody else on a call, and they will be like, okay, what do we do in this particular situation? The process drives the calmness. Now, there is a level of democracy that needs to come in there, which is how do you get to the process? That process, of course, needs to get agreed in the team. And you're doing your regular retrospectives, you're figuring out how the process is working. If you feel like after a couple of retrospectives, the process isn't working well, change it, right? But that is not an excuse not to have a process. One of the things which happens is in Agile, we've said individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So a lot of people have imagined it as no process, no tools.
Correct.
But in a distributed team, if you don't have a process, everyone is imagining the process anyway. So it's better to define the process and change it based on feedback than have no process at all. So let me give you an example. One of the things that we do, and if you go back and look at Jason Yip's article on martinfowler.com about stand-up meetings. So stand-up meetings they predate even the Agile Manifesto. They were a technique that were used in World War II. All right. Now, what is the reason why we used to do stand-up meetings? That time we did not have any Jira. We did not have any distributed teams. All our cards used to be on one wall. So everyone would get together around that wall. They would look at the wall. By the way, in Jira, you have things like comments. You can have integrations with Bitbucket or Git. So every time you make a commit, you will also get an update there. None of those things were there at that time. So you would just look at the card. It was one line. And then you would give an update saying, I did this yesterday. I'm doing this today. And here is where I'm blocked. It made sense in 2001. It does not make sense in 2024. In 2024, every piece of information that a stand-up meeting is supposed to give you should be available to you in real time, transparently. You should not, if you're having to wait for the stand-up meeting, that is a smell. And that is what you need to sort out, right? So those are the little pragmatic changes that you start making to your process. And that process needs to get agreed by the entire team.
So this, point that you made about the processes help us to stay within the boundaries, right? And within that, we give autonomy to the team members. So this reminded me of maybe my childhood way of upbringing in our house, wherein we had certain boundaries in our homes, in our house, and every family has got certain boundaries, right? But that doesn't mean that we are not given the autonomy or freedom. For an example, it could be saying that you cannot play after 8 p.m. That is maybe the process or the rule that we had in our home. But that does not mean that we don't have a freedom to play at all.
Yeah,
So playing
absolutely.
within the boundaries or within the points, right?
Absolutely spot on. I mean, imagine the other freedoms, Ramya. See, on all of my teams, there is one rule that chat is not an urgent medium. The only urgent medium is pick up a phone, call the other person. Chat and email are not urgent mediums. Now, this is a rule that we write down. It's there in our ways of working document. Why do we write it down? Because if we don't write it down, the junior most members of the team will be so insecure, they will keep command tabbing while writing code, while writing requirements, while designing screens, seeing, did somebody write a message for me? Do I need to pay attention, etc., etc.? Because they're insecure, right? At that time, they don't know whether they should monitor it, whether they shouldn't monitor it. What are they doing? They're interrupting their flow in deep work. Are they being the most productive if every few minutes they're command tabbing to Slack or email? They are not. Now, if you say it's okay if you look at chat twice a day, email twice a day, and you decide what those twice a day slots are. And if somebody needs to get in touch with you urgently, they will call you. Imagine the calmness and freedom it gives you. That is where you bring in autonomy, where now people have the space to be able to do their work rather than be like, oh, I have to be present on chat.
Correct. And also, this is something similar to what we call as a working agreement, right, with the teams.
Absolutely.
So, wherein we, as a team, we agree on certain things that we need to abide to, and we don't have to. So, it could be like a no-brainer kind of a thing, wherein we know that okay, if this is the thing, then maybe refer to the working agreement. This is what we agreed upon, and we know that yeah, this is what we already agreed. That also gives us accountability as an individual, saying that no, we had agreed to it, so we better not go wrong on it, or maybe don't break that rule, or maybe that will keep us in check, right? So the point
Absolutely.
that you are saying, okay,
Absolutely.
so maybe
And that's the collective ownership comes in, no, Ramya? That see,
correct.
if you as the Scrum Master, Agile coach, project manager, engineering manager write up the working agreement, and then you are the only person policing it, then it's a lost cause. But it's only when the team together owns it, and then Vivek messages on the team channel and does at Sumeet, and then I don't respond, and then Vivek says, "Oh, Sumeet, why didn't you respond?" I should be able to push back saying I was not meant to respond within this time. I mean, you've said within 4 hours I should respond. I've responded within 4 hours. What's the big deal?
Oh, now I understand the PS that you have under your signature. Over to you, Vivek.
Okay, thanks, Ramya. And I think we need to bring back the conversation more into what the book talks about. And the book really talks about one wonderful thing that I was able to pick out or pick from the one of the chapters is like the converel quadrant, right? As one of the important techniques for communication. Would you like to talk more about it, or maybe just for our listeners to understand what exactly it is, how it can be used with the in our normal communications?
Yeah, yeah, and it answers one of your original questions about when synchronous and when asynchronous.
Yeah.
So think about a 2 by 2 matrix. So on the x-axis, you have the kind of communication that you're trying to do. Are you trying to just convey some information, or are you trying to converge on something, which is you're doing something collaboratively, which requires a lot of cohesive decision making, let's say, right? So convergence on one side, conveyance on one side. And then on the y-axis, you have on top this a strong relationship, at the bottom a weak relationship, right? So now let's start looking at the quadrants. If you are trying to convey information to people that you have a strong relationship with, it's the easiest place to use asynchronous communication, right? You can write a document, you can write a wiki page, you can send an email, text message, whatever. Now, let's say you want to converge on, actually, let's go only conveyance first. So now let's say you want to convey information to people you have a weak relationship with. Can you do that asynchronously? Absolutely, you can. But sometimes you want to do that synchronously. Why? Because you want to build the relationship up just by using the excuse of conveying information. This is what we do, right? So first, let's say you're working with a client. You've not worked with them ever before. You use the act of conveying information to build up that relationship with them. And eventually, your relationship will become stronger, and then you can start doing this asynchronously, right? Now let's think about weak relationship converging on something. You want to make a high stakes decision with people who you don't have a great relationship with. Do you want to go through the slow process of writing, they misunderstanding you, then you say, no, 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 that's not what I meant, etc., etc.? You can default to synchronous in this kind of a case. You can do a workshop, you can do a Zoom meeting, whatever, right? And then there are situations where you have people who you have a strong relationship with, and now you're trying to converge on something. This is where I say you take a hybrid approach, hybrid in a different way, which is start asynchronously, get all of the information together. Because see, we make better decisions when all of us have the same information available. So get all of the information available, do what you can asynchronously, and then for the final step, get together and make the decision synchronously or arrive at the conclusion synchronously. So that's how you can then look at all of your team rituals and team activities and say which ones fit in which quadrant and which ones can be a little more asynchronous. And you will see a large number of those can actually be asynchronous.
Oh wow! I think this approach would help many of the Scrum Masters because I'm saying Scrum Masters because most of our target audiences are Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. This will
Hmm.
help them deal with the situations. For an example, say a team member is not cooperative enough with the other rest of the team members, or they're not agreeing upon, say, daily scrum when to meet, or maybe one is saying, no, I don't want to come to daily meet at all, and one person who is like egoistic. So these are the typical things that scrum masters face in their teams, right? So this approach maybe understanding, okay, this kind of a situation falls under which quadrant, and how we can help, or maybe how we can leverage the approach. I mean, maybe be it synchronous or asynchronous, based upon the quadrant is how we can decide upon how to deal with that situation. So this is, I think, a best way to uh, maybe categorize the situations. And I mean, I really love the approach. So maybe I would also like to talk about the another approach that that your book talks about is a shift left approach to make changes small and incremental. So would you want to talk about it and how does it help?
Yeah. See, one of the things is that it's not just a matter of saying to our teams, from tomorrow we will do no meetings. It doesn't work that way, right? We've got rituals and things that we are doing already, and we can't drop everything. The team will come to a standstill. So change has to be incremental, gradual, and something that the team can absorb. So what I recommend is taking small shifts left. So what do I mean? Imagine a spectrum on which on the far left, you have fully asynchronous communication, which is you're only doing wikis and documents. And on the far right, you have fully synchronous communication, which is only face-to-face and Zoom. Now, one of the things we will agree is that a lot of teams tend to be over-indexed on the right. Too many meetings littered all across the day. So the question to ask ourselves around every act of collaboration is, can we shift a little to the left? So for example, instead of a meeting, can this get solved by a simple chat message? Instead of a chat message, can this be solved with a collaborative document? Instead of a collaborative document, can this be a wiki page? So on and so forth, right? So you take a shift left as much as you possibly can, right? And you don't have to change everything on day one. And the other thing is to consider what value do you want to get from, going async, right? So we talked about a whole bunch of things. We want work-life balance. We want decision velocity. We want to have a more diverse team. Because you're writing things up, you'll be sharing more knowledge, right? So you want better knowledge sharing in the team. You want more time for deep work. Again, the thing with writing is that you're able to scale your team a lot better. Why? Because tomorrow, if somebody joins your team, there's already a lot of documentation, which if you were to just structure with an onboarding checklist, it's easier to bring people on. It's easier also to roll people off your team, right? So you're optimizing for scale. Now, it's a good question to ask the team saying, which pieces of value actually make sense to us because of which we are going async. And then you start picking activities or rituals or variations of rituals that will get you closer to that value. So you don't have to change everything. You just change what will get you closer to those specific kinds of value. And by the way, just a shameless plug on this discussion.
No, no,
If you
absolutely.
if you go to my website, even if you don't ever read the book, I mean, I'd love for everyone who's listening to this to read the book, but even if you don't ever read the book, you will find a method stack. It's at methods.asyncagile.org. And you can then go ahead and filter saying, how do I make my stand-ups more effective? How do I foster more decision velocity? How do I create more diverse teams, so on and so forth. So you can filter, slice and dice by different parameters to find methods that actually work for your particular situation. And so you don't have to change everything, just change those specific methods.
Oh, wow. This would come handy to many of the Scrum Masters or Agile coaches, or maybe any Agile practitioners, I would say. Definitely, we will add that link in the description of this episode, definitely. And when you talked about the shifting left, right? So I could literally hear one of my team members' voice in my head, who is, from, I think, last company, I would say, who used to always say, अरे इसलिए हम लोग क्यों फिर से मीटिंग करें, हम लोग पहले कर लेते हैं and then we will figure out and then we will do if required. So literally I could hear his voice ringing in my head saying that no, we don't want any another meeting. Let's put something on paper and then maybe if we want we can discuss upon it. Yes, I
Yeah,
completely agree on that.
Many of these things, I can resonate with it so much. And also because we are in the same country, right? So we experience some of these things so similarly. So when we start new projects, one of the things that we do is a workshop to start it off, right? We call it in Inceptions, companies call them different things. Now, if you're doing this uh, in the same time zone, it's fine. But again, let's go back to that original situation. Client in San Francisco, you are in India, and now you're trying to simulate a 2-week workshop on Zoom. Imagine the toll it takes on people for 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
where they are up till like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whatever, to try and do 2 weeks of workshopping on Zoom. So
Classic
the
example, PI planning.
exactly. So now, see, back in the day, what did we do? We would say blank slate. Now let's imagine. But today, the other way of doing it is I will put something wrong on the slate, on the whiteboard. How wrong, you tell me. So let us say I'm
Wow.
having to put together a reference architecture. I understand something about the domain. I'm putting together a reference architecture. I will put it up. I will fill the whiteboard with what I think should be the reference architecture. I'm 100% convinced that it is at least partly wrong. Now it's a lot easier for you to point holes at that and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, rather than coming up with it from scratch in a collaborative group environment where half people are half asleep.
Yes. Definitely, it makes a lot of sense to have that as one of the approach of promoting it. But then again, within organization, this is something maybe a difficult thing to do that. And then how in that particular thing, how do you think leaders can help have such kind of a transformation, and what is the support that we should be expecting from leaders or maybe at management level to ensure that we're promoting such kind of a culture to be more into it?
Hey, this is the $1,000,000 question. I'll be perfectly honest. See, leaders want change, but they don't often sponsor the change. What do I mean by sponsoring the change? What usually happens is any change that you bring to any team, you both are agile practitioners, you've done agile coaching. There is no team where you will introduce change and see no dip in productivity whatsoever, at least for a short period of time.
100%.
Right? Because now you're changing what they have been doing for a long time and you're saying new method, right? So there will be a dip in productivity. Does the business support it? Because if the business doesn't support it, you're actually creating more stress. And then it is down to the willpower of the team. And the team will say, no, I can't deal with this stress. The other thing is nobody wants to lose their job on the basis of this change. Tomorrow I go and introduce async practices to my team. Productivity goes down. Do I really want to lose my job on the back of it? So there has to be some support. Business buy-in has to be there, right? That is absolutely crucial. Then, the other thing is that leaders who believe that, well, okay, we need to go in this direction because we want X, Y, Z benefits, all the benefits that we talked about. They can't be just arm twisting their team saying from tomorrow, no meetings. They have to take the team along in the journey. So the team also has to recognize the same benefits. Because if the team doesn't recognize the benefits, who are you doing it for? Okay, so that's the second thing. And the third is the necessity to go into depth. Again, just saying no meetings does not work. You have your sprint planning meeting, you have your daily scrum, you have retrospectives, you have sprint review, you have, technical analysis, what have you, right? And all of these are meetings. What are you going to do as an alternative? You have to go practice by practice by practice and say, what is the alternative? And that requires a level of depth, which means that leaders need to roll up their sleeves, get dirt under their fingernails, and start thinking about alternatives with the team, and then document them and practice them and coach them. Though that's the role of leaders. Now, unfortunately, I'm pretty sure you've experienced that many leaders believe that their job is to monitor employees,
Yes.
right? And by the way, they don't do this because of the fact that they're evil people, bad people, whatever. There are a lot of texts out there that says you should do management by walking around and looking, right? MB wall, management by walking around and looking. So what in a remote environment, how do you do management by walking around and looking? You are seeing who is active on chat, who is responding quickest on email, right? If people don't
Last
respond,
scene.
last scene, exactly. If I did not see you for 4 hours on chat, you must have been slacking off, or maybe you're moonlighting. So that is the mode of operating from which leaders need to get away and say, look, even if you were slacking off, even if you were moonlighting, I don't care. I care about outcomes, right? If there was a certain outcome that Sumeet was responsible for, is he delivering to that outcome? And that's fine in that case. And is he actually adhering to what the team's charter is, the working agreement that Ramya, you talked about? And that's fine. So create that working agreement, create transparent processes, and then ensure that everyone knows what outcomes they're trying to drive towards. And if somebody can get those outcomes delivered in 4 hours, why do you care?
Yes. And I remember the point that you mentioned. In one of the projects, I was doing this agile adoption for them and I was coaching the teams and all. So the point that you mentioned about measuring the productivity of the team members is through maybe micromanaging how many hours they are spending, or maybe what is the away time, and exactly all these things. So one of the typical questions the maybe the leader, I mean, of the project, maybe the delivery leader, whatever title that we want to call, asked is that how much time is this person spending on a particular task? For an example, how much time it takes. I mean, this was the thing when I entered into that project, or this is what my observation were. They were measuring their productivity in hours, saying that, okay, this task will take, say, 6 hours. Okay. And if the person, as you rightly mentioned, is responsible for the outcome, despite him or her doing moonlighting, slacking, or whatever, that is none of our business actually. So
Yeah.
the manager was of the opinion, this person has said that this task would be completed in say 6 hours, but then this person is only available for say 4 hours. What is this person doing for rest of the 2 hours? And I was so upfront. I mean, because it took me aback, and I was like, that is none of our business, right? So we don't want to micromanage them on the number of hours. I said, why do you want to do that? I try to get into the root cause of this, maybe the behavior or the kind of measuring the productivity. So, to my surprise, the manager told was because we are billing based on the hours. I said, why are you doing that? So he said, the manager said that because client wants to know which person has spent how many hours on which task. I said, how is that going to help? So that will help our stakeholders to build their clients. So I said, oh, there is a bigger problem to solve now. So I said, let me talk to the stakeholder and figure out what is the problem. So I told that person, the stakeholder, I spoke to that stakeholder, and I said, you know what, you need not micromanage someone based on the hours, because just because you want to bill, show that how many hours they are putting. I said either the person is completely available for that particular sprint, or maybe whatever percentage is available. You cannot micromanage within the single day how many hours they are spending on a particular task, right? So I told the stakeholder that, would you mind me suggesting a better approach in this? So he was open to that, and luckily we figured out a way wherein this thing was put away. And to do this, they were maintaining a sheet called as timesheets. Okay, on
Mhm.
this hour, this is the task I was spending. On this date, this is the thing. So the moment I took out of that system, the timesheet out of the system, team literally thanked me in person, saying that, you know what, this was the biggest headache that we were facing, and good you did that. So this is the mentality, or this is the kind of a mindset people deal with, because they don't have any deeper insights to do that, because that's the way they are schooled. I mean, that's the school of thoughts they belong to. So
Yeah.
yes, I mean, that's a important point that you mentioned.
Yeah, and look, I'm actually quite sympathetic to some managers who have to do a job, right? Because some of this is above their pay grade also, let's be honest. How a contract is set up with a client, they don't really define how that contract is set up. So if it's set up as time and materials, where you are billing by the hour, the manager's employer, which is the services company, has to bill a certain number of hours to be able to make the money that they hoped that they will make from the project, right?
Correct.
And that is a real problem to solve. Now, there are two solutions to that problem. One is this whole hours equals productivity is a very old mindset.
Yeah.
See, I mean, we do knowledge work. We know that more your mind works, the more tired it gets. It actually doesn't get better with time. So in fact, now you will see around the world, there are these 4-day work week experiments that are
Yes.
going on. And the companies that are going through that experiment are saying they don't want to go back because they are seeing that the employees are happier and they're getting the same productive outcomes. But that is essentially incompatible with a bill by hour setup, right? So there is an industry-wide change that needs to happen, but that's a long change, right? It will not happen overnight. Definitely in India, where we have a lot of these bill by hour time and materials kind of contracts, it'll be difficult. It'll take time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it'll take time. But what is possible? What is possible is that if you know your team well, so let us say Vivek is my manager and Vivek knows me well, right? He's doing regular one-on-ones with me. He knows my skills. He knows that I'm able to actually achieve my outcomes within 4 hours. Vivek can now start to create more challenging work for me, right? He can create an
Exactly.
environment where I feel more stretched. I don't have to just sit there and pretend to work for 4 hours doing boring shit, right? I might as well do something that stretches me, right? And when you start getting out of useless meetings, you make time for the meaningful meetings like the one-on-one, right? The one-on-one is the most important tool in a manager's arsenal.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So again, I would also like to share one of the examples, or maybe my experience with working with one of the. Obviously, I was part of the service organization, and I was working for this customer. Obviously, they all of a sudden they adopted an approach saying that there is going to be no Friday meetings. So everyone within the setup, where including the developers, everyone from from the junior level to the very top level, everyone was quite relaxed. So everyone used to anticipate or look forward for Fridays. They in fact they used to be happy coming to office, saying that we're still coming to office and we are focusing on what we are supposed to be working without getting disturbed or having to look at my calendar saying that okay, there is a meeting lined up and I need to join it. So and when we had that introspection looking at how it has worked, definitely this makes more sense for us. If it happened to that there is a very urgency for me to reach out to someone, or it's I still make a decision whether I need to set up something for because it's Friday, it's stopping me. Can I hold on to this Friday and can I have that interaction on Monday? So that is how things change, and that is how it made a good impact in terms of maybe yes productivity, but whether people enjoyed it in terms of the happiness, yes, it definitely shoot up the the happiness index for everyone involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you said, it's remarkable because it's also a forcing function of sorts. The very fact that Fridays are meeting free now forces you to think that why don't I postpone this non-urgent item for Monday? Or why don't I write things up so that when people are back on Monday, they would have already consumed the information they need, and we can have a more fruitful discussion, right? So this is the exact forcing function that I try to apply on teams that I work with, which is decide one half of the day, which is always going to be meeting free. Okay. So for
Wow.
example, we say that mornings, our minds are fresh. We don't want to get into meetings that time because our mind gets fried if we are in meetings all morning. So mornings are meeting free. That is when we do deep work. Afternoons, you can have meetings. And as you said, Fridays are also meeting free. Why Fridays meeting free? You can also do Thursdays meeting free. You can also do Tuesdays meeting free. Why Fridays? Because you can end your week with a sense of accomplishment because you get 8 hours for deep work, right? So you also feel like you achieved something that day. Now, that still leaves 16 hours every week for meetings. That's a lot of meetings. Elite teams get away with less than 2 hours of meetings per person per week,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So when you're talking about 16 hours, that's a lot of time for meetings throughout the week, right? You can still do your meetings, but now you've created a forcing function which creates time for deep work, which gives time for flexibility. If people think of a meeting during that time, then they will document stuff and make themselves more effective for that particular meeting. Because I'm sure you've experienced this. When you start writing down, let's say you face a problem and you start writing down, I did this, I was trying to achieve this, I couldn't do this. Do you realize that sometimes you actually come up with the solution while writing down your problem? Because it helps you break down what you were trying to achieve, right? And so
It's
that
like
also
tossing the
happens.
coin.
Exactly, exactly. So a lot of those things happen. So you can implement that forcing function. I found that incredibly effective on the teams that I work with.
Oh, wow. I mean, so many wonderful tips and techniques uh, to handle such situations. Maybe now I would like to just talk about maybe common pitfalls of first work. So, are there any common maybe challenges or pitfalls of first work? Or if yes, what are they? Could you highlight if there are any?
Hey, lots. So one is this whole async island phenomenon, wherein my team is async, the whole organization is going sync, and this is something Vivek talked about, right? Your team never exists in a silo. So now the other team that you're collaborating with wants a meeting on Thursday morning. You have said Thursday morning is meeting free. What do? You've got to be able to find some way of slowly transitioning the rest of the organization as well. And which slice of the organization do you recruit? How do you communicate with your collaborating teams? How do you create a team API? This is absolutely crucial. So that's one. The other is inside the team, you can get into a very confrontational kind of setup. Talk to the document, right? Like talk to the hand, talk to the document. You don't want to get there, right? I mean, you want to retain a human way of working. So don't forget that one-on-ones are important. Don't forget that certain teams enjoy happy hours. Certain teams, almost every team will do incredibly well if they meet up in person from time to time. Then there are times of incredible churn in a team. So, for example, when you're standing up a team for the first time, you don't have your initial tech stack figured out. You've not done your sprint zero. You're trying to figure out, how you're going to implement the reference architecture that you put together, et cetera, right? You don't even have your team working agreement. That might be a good time for the team to get together because it's very fast paced and you have a lot of stuff to finish in a short period of time, and you might want to consider co-locating during that time. 1 week together might actually stand you in good stead for the next 6 months, right? So you don't want to get this standoffish relationship. And then there are a lot of problems that I think as an industry we need to solve with remote work in general. Okay. See, I am a big proponent of remote work, but remote work is not perfect today. What happens? Let me give you a few examples. If I don't see you on a regular basis, you stop being Vivek and Ramya after some time. You become employee number 11984 and employee number 11786,
Yes.
right? Then you're not human beings anymore. And then if I'm in a position of power, I start dehumanizing you as a person. That's one problem. Now, if you don't address systemic biases in the team, in the organization, what are the systemic biases I'm talking about? There's something called proximity bias. I see somebody regularly, I think that person is productive. I don't see somebody regularly, that person is slacking off. Now, if that bias already exists amongst your managers, and your managers often go to the office, your managers are often active on chat and email, then guess who's going to get the promotions? Guess who's going to get great performance appraisals, right? And then, by the way, I said this thing about women at the start, right? Now, I want to tell you something about myself. I'm a single dad to my daughter.
Mhm.
Now, when women today, this is great progress our industry has made. When women today say they want more flexibility at work, companies still understand. A man goes and asks for flexibility at work. Now, all of a sudden, you're a wuss.
Correct.
They don't understand, right? So there are those issues. We talked about dysfunctional practices. You don't have any process. Remote work makes things harder in those kind of situations, right? So there are all of these little problems that we also need to iron out with remote work, in addition to some of the pitfalls that I mentioned around async. So none of these are without pitfalls, but are they steps that we can take towards a more equitable workplace? I think so.
Yes, absolutely. And since you brought out that point related to proximity differences or biases, I was just reading an article today, and this is I was literally shocked reading that article. There is an organization, a very large organization within India, having a policy saying that your annual appraisals are going to depend based on how much you have come back to, or maybe you have reported to office, or you've been regular to office. So it's so much a kind of a negativity that you have created based on that single statement. And this is a large organization within India. I don't want to call out it now, but that was something took it made me just reading that article, it made me feel little uncomfortable how the employees within that organization might be feeling about it.
Yeah, and look, Vivek, here's the thing. We need to look at this on a longer time horizon. There are two forces at play at this point. One is that for the last 1.5 years, tech companies haven't done very well. Now the market is going back up a little. So a lot of things that large public companies do are not because they are the right thing. They have to show their investors they are doing something. Right? So now they are telling their investors, look, we're calling people back into the office. We're going to be more collaborative. We're going to be more productive. Who knows whether they're going to be that, but they have to show, right? Second thing to keep in mind, large companies are also real estate companies. They are not just tech companies. Okay. So
Biggest
imagine,
problem.
sorry.
That's the biggest problem, biggest reason. Blame SEZ zones, because of which people
Yeah.
are forced to call back.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of your listeners who are in another country may not understand this, but I used to work for a company called Infosys. Infosys
Yes.
has hundreds of thousands of employees. I used to work in a campus which was 330 acres large. It is a campus that Infosys owns. They have invested money into it. It's not something that they have leased that they can just say from tomorrow we're not leasing this anymore. It's their campus. If people work from home, it remains empty. So for them, it doesn't make sense for people to actually work from home because they're paying the maintenance and upkeep of that huge campus, plus they are paying for whatever benefits people will ask for to work remotely. So they are also a real estate company. But remember, not every IT company is the real estate company. My company, for example, leases their offices. So in that particular situation, it probably makes sense to at least reduce your lease obligations and reduce some of that operational expense. It's not CapEx, it's OpEx. So that is number two. One is public companies behave very differently. Number two, number of companies are real estate companies. Number three is this very old school mindset, which is when you can squeeze employees, you should.
Yeah.
And it's a very feudal mindset that people operate with, wherein, why should employees be happy? Like, uh, whatever, right?
Industrial era.
Yeah, so there is that very feudal mindset towards employment. And I've heard managers say this. I will tell you exactly the words I've heard them say. They say that right now the balance of power is in the hands of employers, and this is when we can shift the behaviors. So
Oh
they believe
God.
that they can actually shift the behavior because right now the job market might be weak, and hence people don't have those many options, and hence we can get them back into the habit of coming to the office, and then they won't say anything. But guess what? Over a period of time, let's look back at our work experience. I started working in a time where developers did not get laptops, developers did not get email on their phone, back in the day, only managers used to carry these fancy Blackberries.
Yes.
Okay. And they used
Correct.
to feel very proud. They used to have their laptop. They used to have Blackberries. What did top talent say? They said, look, we also want laptops. Did top talent eventually get laptops? Now every employee in every tech firm usually gets a laptop, right? Do top talent also said, why should managers only have email on their phones? We also want email on our phones. Did top
Correct.
talent actually get that? They got that. So top talent always gets what top talent wants. And what we do know for a fact about tech is that talent is scarce. Top talent is even more scarce. So over a
Yes.
period of time, if this is the direction which top talent wants to go to, that is the direction where the entire workforce will go. Now, whether that happens in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we don't know, but it will happen. And companies will have to fall in line. We just need to be patient. And that's okay. That's okay. We can be patient.
Yes. And to add to that, the point that you mentioned, managers used to have a laptop and others would not get the laptop. It's like only when you become a lead is when you get a laptop. That was the silliest thing that I heard. I mean, because when I was not a manager or a lead, so when I asked for it, not just because I want to flaunt that I'm having a laptop back then, just because if I have to work from home to address any urgent issue, then it would be difficult for me to maybe come sit late in the office and do that. But the excuse I got was, no, 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 you will get laptop only when you become a lead. And I was like, what a headache. I mean, I am not going to sit whole day, whole night over here working, slogging myself to just fix or test one thing or maybe fix something, right? So, yes, I
Yeah.
mean, looking at the times that we were in and now, things have changed a lot, I would say. And talking about these things, talking about maybe industrial era, knowledge era, that brought me to the maybe second last question of this conversation is you mentioned about Gen Z in your book as well. So can you talk about Gen Z and their work preferences on how Async-First aligns with the values and expectations of the future workforce?
Yeah, I mean, as I say this, I should mention that Gen Z in India is very different from Gen Z in the West. Also, even when we talk about Global South, Gen Z in India versus Gen Z in Latin America versus Gen Z in Africa, very different, you know, personas out there. But a couple of things, right? One thing is that if you look at a lot of social movements that are happening, whether it is related to climate, in fact, Al Jazeera very recently did this whole feature about Gen Zs and their pursuit of work-life balance, right? Uh, and you will notice that a lot of these movements are being spearheaded by young people. And I mean, I get a lot of energy looking at that. So, and it comes from a couple of things, right? So if you look at a number of these Gen Zs who are talking about climate, who are talking about work-life balance, who are talking about work making its way around your life rather than life making its way around work, right? They are able to do so because they are third generation workers, fourth generation workers. So they are also standing on the shoulders of their parents who've slogged it out, and they enjoy a certain level of privilege and a certain level of social comfort, right? And that's a good thing, because if you look at a lot of social change that happens when people who have that privilege use that privilege in the right way.
Correct.
So that is where I feel like this new workforce, especially the workforce that comes with a little extra privilege, is in a position to, I mean, this new way of working firstly addresses their concerns, because think about it. Around the time when the pandemic was on, people were not commuting. We used to get these beautiful images from places like Punjab, where there used to be haze on the horizon and people were seeing the Himalayas, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of on the planet, the fact that people don't have to commute all the time, right? There is actually now new research that says that the less people commute, the kinder it is to the planet, even in that local area. So it starts to address some of those Gen Z concerns. We've talked about work-life balance, that it starts to address some of those concerns. But also what it does is, with now, once we stop emphasizing number of hours so much, we also start to create a better workplace for these young people. I think somebody like me who's in my mid 40s, the best I can do is to create a workforce where these young people who have that energy can feel included, right? And that's why I feel like there is something to be said about A, Gen Z inclusion, and B, Gen Z satisfaction. Do they feel satisfied being in a workplace like this?
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about the Gen Z, I think the mindset that these people have from the Gen Z generation is completely different from the previous generations. The reason being is, as you rightly mentioned, because they don't have to worry about the maybe roti kapda makan kind of a situation, or standard of living kind of a situation, because that is already been taken care by their previous generations. Now what they want to do is they want to maintain that, they want to kind of walk through their life. I mean, not that live through the work kind of a mentality. And it's like they don't care. They know that they have a talent. They know that there are ample opportunities now. Now it's like, if we don't give them the freedom they want, the opportunities they want, then they are free to move and switch to any other organization, because now with the remote working, the lines are also blurred. As in, how do I apply? It is far away from my home or whatever. So I think these are the things that we need to at least, as you mentioned, do, so that we can help them feel satisfied, or maybe valued. I think these are the things that we need to remember, maybe keep in mind or be mindful about when we are hiring new generation kids, because they are full of energy, talent, and also opportunity. So if you don't value them, then they will be moving out, the kind of top layer
Absolutely.
employees.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing is, again, talent scarce industry, right? This is the next wave of talent that is hitting the industry. You don't address that next wave of talent, you do so at your own peril, right? Where are you going to get the next wave of talent from? And if you don't address, what do you do? And the other thing is, Ramya, there are two kinds of people, very simplistically speaking. For some, their work, their job is the end all and be all. They exist to work. That's great. I doff my hat to them. I respect them. There are some of us for whom, work is a means to another end. Work is a way to pay your bills. Work is maybe a way to fund another passion that you have. I'll say this on your show. I mean, I enjoy my work, but it funds my passion, which is photographing nature. That's my true passion. And is one thing more noble than the other? Should be fine to
Not
just have
really.
a job that is good enough. And a lot of people, I mean, you should watch that Al Jazeera episode. There's this young woman called Gabrielle Judge who got featured in that. And she runs a trend called lazy girl job, which is provocative again, lazy girl. But it's it's because she wants to be provocative that she has that name. Because her point is that work doesn't need to burn you out. You can still do a good job without feeling burnt out, stressed, and overworked all the time, without work being the center stage of your life.
Absolutely. I really loved the last segment of this conversation. Obviously, the starting with the conversation and then leading to the path where we all feel that in a certain way, one should have the freedom to decide what they want to do, but also an opportunity in certain way that we will do it the way we are comfortable. And with that, on a closing note, Sumit, what we would like to have a last thought from you is, what advice would you would like to give to someone who is considering making the transition to an such kind of an model where they feel that we should have this as an approach? What should be their starting point?
Yeah, I think my advice would be most applicable to people who are in some level of who have some level of influence on their teams, right? So you might be a team lead, a scrum master, a coach, an engineering manager, whatever, right? You have influence in your team. Figure out, where your team might be hurting. Are they hurting with knowledge sharing? Are they hurting with work-life balance? Because that might be an interesting trigger to introduce this idea to your team. And what I would suggest is first things first, assess your team's maturity and assess your team's willingness to absorb change. Right? So when I say maturity, how mature are they already at distributed work practices? And there are a number of things that come in. Simple things like, do we do meeting minutes when we get into a meeting? Do we maintain decision records? How long does it take for somebody to get onboarded onto our team? So on and so forth. How much time do we spend in meetings? These things give you a sense of your distributed work maturity, right? And you also want to get a sense of what are the pieces of value that your team is seeking, because then that gives you a sense of your team's receptivity for change. And it also gives you a sense of how much change is absolutely necessary. Once you've been able to establish that, as I said, you need to get business buy-in to be able to absorb the impact of change. And then something that I said earlier in this conversation as well, don't be shallow and high level. You need to get into the depth of every practice that your team is going through at this point of time, and then say, this one needs an asynchronous alternative. This one probably needs more asynchronous blended in, and this one probably needs to stay synchronous, right? It's only when you go into the detail practice by practice that you'll be able to make real change. So those would be my pieces of advice, which is the reason why I put together the book in the format of a playbook. You don't have to read it end to end. You can say, oh, I just want to improve how we do sprint planning, right? And you can just read that particular chapter if that makes sense to you, right? I want to improve how we do decisions. Just read that particular chapter and pick the plays that make sense for your team.
Oh, wow. That was a wonderful piece of advice, I would say. And the point that you mentioned about maybe understanding the maturity level, I think just 2 days back, Vivek and I, we were speaking about it. Vivek, I hope you remember that conversation wherein we were just trying to uh, get into an agreement wherein, okay, this is the thing that we need to understand first. And we were just kind of brainstorming on this. And now I think we get the validation that was the correct approach that we took, and so many beautiful points and maybe learnings, at least for me, I would say, be it Teamops handbook or maybe the Gen Z culture or the pillars of Teamops. So many things that I learned from this conversation. Definitely, I would recommend all our listeners and viewers to read your book. And I know that it is available on Amazon now for India. So please go buy the book, read it. And we were lucky ones to have a copy of it. So and we are going to deep dive into the book. And yes, thank you so much, Sumit, for this wonderful conversation. I think that we have just scratched the surface. When we talked about the topic, we would want to deep dive again, maybe as a next installment to our conversation in future. So thank you so much for your time today and doing this podcast with us.
My pleasure, both of you. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you so much for watching this episode patiently till the end. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll meet you again in the next episode. Till then, if you like our podcast show, then do like, share, subscribe, and let us know your feedback in the comment section. You can also listen to the episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Audible. Thank you.